Hello and welcome to the Amplify Film Festival. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Roger Griffith. I'm here on behalf of FilmBath, an organisation, Come Revolution, here in good old Bristol, out in the southwest of England. You're with me to the Q&A with two excellent directors who joined us from USA. We've had a pre-chat there. They're out in LA, where they are currently filming, and I'm delighted to join us. Welcome, everybody. Give us a virtual handshake welcome and a round of applause to Richard Poplak and Diane Neille. Welcome the directors of the film Influence.
Thanks, Roger.
So welcome to you both. Stunning piece of work, I have to say that. All the more poignant, speaking as a black man who's grown up through some of those turbulent times of Thatcher, where there was 3 million unemployed, and she called famously called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. And I thought, well, anybody who's calling Nelson Mandela a terrorist it's got to be an enemy of mine. I've always had quite a difficult relationship with Thatcher, but then seeing the shadowy hands of Lord Bell and that patronage and kind of weaponizing of that political process was quite how you unfolded it, and it's very layers, which I'm going to look at kind of the past and present and future. But first of all, let's give you a chance to talk about the film in your own words. What was your inspiration behind the film?
Well, the whole genesis for the idea of the film, and I must credit Diana for that. She came to me and pitched me on ruining my writing career to kind of be a documentary filmmaker. But the organization that we work for is called Daily Maverick in South Africa, and we're actually a world-renowned investigative unit that does a lot of deep dives into corruption. And we were gifted by a whistleblower a cache of emails that became known as the Gupta leaks. Now, the Guptas were a trio of the brothers living in South Africa who were effectively our president at the time, Jacob Zuma. They served as his beneficiaries, as his mafia bagmen. So when we got this tranche of about 180,000 emails that belonged to the Guptas' financial interests, they exploded our understanding of how the state under Jacob Zuma was captured and subverted for political and financial gain. At the core of the messaging of this project, which became known in South Africa as state capture, was a not so small British public relations firm, Bell Pottinger. And so that was the inspiration. The inspiration for telling the story, for exploding the story and building out on it, came from the Gupta leaks, this tranche of now very famous leaked documents that helped explain the near ruination of South Africa under Jacob Zuma and his allies.
So basically, you basically operated as private investigators then, in terms of like creating, but just in celluloid, and then work back in terms of putting this kind of jigsaw puzzle of intrigue backwards and also forwards, because you project into Trump, which we'll come to a bit later.
Absolutely. I think once we decided that this story was interesting, was relevant, and that this wasn't by any means the first or the last of Bell Pottinger's campaigns. Well, in fact, sorry, it was the last campaign, because they shortly went into liquidation thereafter. We started to dig a little bit deeper, realized that this story spanned 40 years, and really told the story of modern communication. Starting with advertising and Lord Tim Bell, who's the main character. His kind of role in advertising, understanding how you could use messaging in the political realm, into political advising for Margaret Thatcher, as you mentioned, and then into this role that he pioneered called reputation management, which he then took as a salesman around the world to various world leaders, multinationals, and so forth. To essentially create a new business model for the election process, for democratic processes, for, I suppose you could call it, the disinformation complex.
Yes.
Roger, there's a couple of things I think that are worth emphasizing, especially with relation to what you said about Margaret Thatcher earlier. What Bell was able to do was make a transition, make the cognitive leap from selling soap to selling a political party. He was one of the earliest people to figure out how to make that transition, how to make it very successful. But what he also helped do under Margaret Thatcher was shape the messaging of neoliberalism. So the words that we unthinkingly spew today, the language, the grammar of politics that we use today all over the world, was shaped by the work that they did together. Furthermore, taking that out into the geopolitical realm, in other words, all of the many, many admirers of Margaret Thatcher around the world formed part of Lord Bell's network, right? And we tend to think that that Thatcher is passé and out of favor these days as a political lodestar. That's a huge mistake. She's still massively in favor. Many of the messaging points that they came up with all those years ago still stand, and Lord Bell still stands in the minds of many as a towering figure within the context of geopolitical reputation management.
No, I mean, just put it in that the context of myself as a broadcaster and an author. We grew up with Thatcher and 3 million unemployed. We had inner city riots. You had Green and Common then, that was going on with women organising them against the sea and D-Rally. Had the poll tax later on in 87. And importantly, bang in the middle of that, which is where Mr. Bell came into being, with the National Miners Association, one of his key campaigns, and that whole miners' strike, and that whole, which was really put a shaft of division through the country. And one of the things I wrote down was really later on they went on to weaponize the white working classes. What we're seeing with today, which is some of those neoliberal principles that you're talking about.
Absolutely, I think that's something that's a phenomenon that we're seeing increasingly. Is that alignment, the allyship between the working class and the ruling class that has become so weaponized, so fractious. But certainly, I think that campaign in particular really brought Thatcher and Bell together. They had both come up from young ages through the conservative movement and had a lot in common. Certainly, their relationship has been described as a platonic love affair. But I think certainly their work on the miners' strike solidified in many ways the language of their campaign moving forward, and was certainly a seminal, I think, moment for Bell in understanding the power that he wielded with these relationships that he had.
Another thing there is that concurrent with what Ronald Reagan was doing here in the United States with regard to the aircraft control tower unions, breaking that union, that formed the vanguard of the war against the working class and effectively destroyed labor as a real movement in the West. Going a little further from that, Diana and I would argue that last December's Conservative landslide victory in the UK was effectively Bell's win. I mean, it was posthumous. He had been dead for 6 months. But the fact that the allyship, as Diana mentioned, between the working class and a conservative elite was solidified in that moment in the UK, just as it was with Trump in 2016.
Absolutely, and also some of those slogans that you can now turn back in terms of labour as working. Well, I was unemployed throughout that the decade of Thatch during the 80s, and so the irony of those slogans, which were nothing but slogans, but they were of the politics of hate. And I want to come there, or maybe you and the audience, don't forget, you'll be able to we'll have your questions. Please text them through. We'll get them to speak shortly. But I'm going to continue with the questions you mentioned. Let's go to the kind of key protagonist here, because I'm quite interested in how you managed to get Tim Bell onto the roster. From looking at the Newsnight interviews, which were again like almost caricature. We don't, and we work in the business of telling truth. But now we would, if you're in LA at the moment, if you come up with this particular story and where it led to, you'd be laughed out of court. It would have to be only be made into a documentary for us to really believe it. But how much was the Tim Bell? Was he easy to coax along? Did you have to chase him into getting him onto the camera?
Well, Diana dispatched me to the UK, I think, at the end of December
December
2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she said, go and make sure that you don't come back to South Africa unless you have access with Lord Bell. So off I went, and I had a bunch of phone numbers. Obviously, I had to do this very gingerly because I was part of the team that worked on the Gupta leaks, and as a journalist in this space, my name is reasonably well known. I eventually called him up, said to him, "Look, I'm in town. Can I come over for a cup of tea?" And he said, "Absolutely." So off I trundled to Belgravia, sat down with him and one of his lieutenants. We had a cup of tea, and I said, "Look, this film is going to go ahead. Your participation would obviously be beneficial. At least you get to tell your side of the story. All I'm asking from you is 3 days." 2 months later, we're in the UK shooting with him. He gave us 5 days. He was immensely hospitable. He spoke unedited for 25 hours. We left our equipment in his house. For the duration of that process, it was a mutually respectful relationship that eventually did end up melting down for the obvious reasons.
Yeah. I think what we realized in that situation was that it was going to be a difficult one purely for the nature of what we were there to get, but we were very straightforward with what our aims were, and we made sure to be very, very well researched before we went. Oh, yeah. So we arrived with briefs and everything kind of ready to go, and in that way we were able to engage, we feel, in a very robust conversation with him, which I think, looking back, he seemed to appreciate. Certainly there were a few moments where we had a different version of events, and we kind of put that to him, and he was very, I think, fair in giving us the time and I suppose being straightforward, if you can say that. Difficult to tell with someone like Tim, but certainly him and his wife were very, as Richard said, very hospitable to have us. But it was quite the experience to spend that much time with someone about whom you know so much, and having to ask difficult questions. But we certainly feel that it was a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, if you work in the field of geopolitical corruption, which Diana and I do, Bell is basically your Brad Pitt, or more appropriately, your Darth Vader. I mean, he's a very well-known figure. On the right, very well respected. On the left, completely loathed. I mean, there's no one in the middle of Bell. No one says, "Oh yeah, he's an all right bloke." No one has ever said that about Tim Bell. So it was an extraordinary experience. It really was, and an education.
Well, even Darth Vader had a epiphany towards the end of that. Sort of spoiler alert. Sorry, everybody has seen them. But on that line, was his mood? Was it a confessional for him? Is it something he wanted to be unburdened, or because he must obviously he's reached the end of his time. He can see his life unfolding. And he died not long afterwards. Was it must have known how this was going to go down? Was it unburdening of his of this? I might as well tell my story the way it is rather than someone else, a shadowy figure. Then how was it for you, Ben?
I think we spoke about this a lot because you would have also seen another figure, Nigel Oakes, who was the CEO of SCL Group, which was the holding company for Cambridge Analytica, who plays quite a big role in the film as well. And as he says, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and certainly there was a sense that the main characters in our film were either very ill or had, in the process of dying, frankly. And it was, there was definitely a sense or a question between us of whether that was, the reason that they spoke to us was because they felt that they wanted one last go at a final, a final word. Nigel still seems hale and hearty. We spoke to him recently, but we were actually at Tim's house filming the day that he passed away, unknowingly. And it was certainly interesting to reflect back on what he had said, which was, he confessed to being someone who enjoyed being close to power, to being able to bask in the light of power. And certainly, I think a lot of the things that he said kind of indicated that he was at that stage of his life where he was thinking back. Was he repentant? Was he looking for some kind of, final forgiveness or some kind of final defense. I wouldn't say that. No, I think he was steadfast to the last.
And I think he was trying to spin us. I mean, I do think that was part of his project with regard to this thing. That if he was pure Tim Bell, unadulterated, and switched on all of his charm, this would have ended up as a hagiography, and everyone would have been happy, and it would have run on BBC 6 times a night into perpetual.
Okay, do keep those questions coming in. Thanks, Miles. We've got your question. I will come to it, but I'm still. I just want to unpick this. So much of this that is fascinating to me. So, again, staying with Tim Bell and his kind of the nature of the beast, if I may. You talked there about his power. So moving from Thatcher, and then he pops up in with the Pinochet regime. He pops up behind Iraq. You had to look this person in the eye, and one of the things that he says is about being. He has this argument with you about being immoral and amoral. And I know you're experienced journalist in terms of the work that you do and the cover it. But what's as an interviewer and broadcaster, does a shiver when you're looking back at the tape? Do you think, gee, has this person got no morality of the deaths that are there, and the pictures are all there? You signify that brilliantly in the grades in Chile, and then the weapons of mass destruction that he helped stoke. What was your feeling that when you listen to that and your humaneness? What do you feel?
Yeah, look, I've got to say one thing that I think is very important and helps explain my motivation and Diana's motivation. Nothing that happens makes me less enraged by what Jacob Zuma, the Guptas, and their enablers did in South Africa. So if you ask why we made this movie, that we made this movie, yes, because we're journalists, right? And ultimately we have to use verifiable fact as the basis for the work that we do. There's no question about that. But we're still really pissed off by what happened in our country over that period. And the reason we're pissed off is because people are still hungry, and the material effects are obvious for all to see on the ground. I mean, we're running near 50% unemployment right now in real terms, right? And the reason for that, largely, is because of corruption. Okay, there's dozens of other factors, but we've had our opportunities to turn our country around, and that was stolen from us. The enablers of that were multinational companies like McKinsey, like KPMG, like SAP, like Liebherr, like Bell Pottinger, right? So when you look at it in that context and sort of take a baseline anger at what South Africa was hammered with over the course of a decade under Jacob Zuma and his friends all over the world, we're pretty pissed off. Then you add into the fact that someone like Lord Bell, and he wasn't alone in this, had no compunction about working for Augusto Pinochet. I mean, that's lunacy, right? Now you could argue that these people have a right to get their message out into the world, but the problem there is that there is always this power asymmetry. If you could afford to hire Lord Bell, who had Rupert Murdoch on speed dial, and had all of the sort of weaponry of a misinformation specialist behind him, then how are the rest of us supposed to compete with that, right? So yeah, I mean, there was this baseline of anger that drove us through the entire project, and also a healthy heaping of disgust.
Yeah, for me, I think part of that disgust also, when we started this process, we at least I can only speak for myself, the assumption was that there was at least some kind of method or process or system involved in how this work was perpetrated. And I think what we quickly learned in all of these cases, notably in Iraq, notably in Chile and in South Africa, that really, what you've got is just a bunch of people working behind the scenes who are just making it up as they go along, frankly. You sit with somebody who's done this work for years and years, and you say, how do you do it? What are the, and you can argue that it's proprietary information or that it's trade secrets or whatever. But the impression really is that we're not, there's no real science behind it. It's understanding how to manipulate large audiences, understanding that you're not looking at how one person behaves or how one person thinks. You're understanding how many people do a certain thing at a certain time on any given day, and you figure out how to subvert or manipulate the way the way you communicate with that group of people. And it was just so mind-blowing to understand that this work was being done at a massively high level for hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, the Iraq campaign was, we were told way more than the $560 million that was reported. That's an insane amount of money. And what was the result of that? They made 640 ads, which ran over the course of a number of years. There were TV shows and a variety of other communications devices that were employed. And what's the outcome? So essentially what you're looking at is a system that is created out of no real structure, and that cannot measure its results. So it's like we've kind of compared it to a dirty bomb. You let the bomb off, and you have no way of telling what the results will be, or what the damage will be. And that is, in my mind, just unbelievably irresponsible to do at such a high level, and with so much at stake for entire nation states like ours that were affected by this work. And so certainly I think that was where part of our anger stemmed from. And I think sometimes, that is a good motivation to tell a story like this.
That's great. And I want to stay there, because I did say I'm going to cover it in past, present, and future. We'll do the future after we've had the questions from the audience, what I'm going to come to shortly. But staying in your present, because it's your country, and that's why I termed it there. And Richard led us there with it, and by all means stay with that anger. So when you obviously you've got the good to takes, but casting back again and getting de Klerk to speak on camera and give his account of events again. He would have known you, he would have known of these things. How was it dealing with him? Was that how easy or difficult was that as a president of an apartheid regime, someone who's in some of those quarters that you would have come across lauded for being the white savior, if you like, but you play on that and really expose some of his frailties within the documentary as if he was going to win, or at least Tim Bell had said that. How was he getting FW de Klerk onto the camera?
Yeah, well, look, I'm not going to mince words here. In terms of the practicalities of getting him, we had a researcher on board who was helping us, and Diane and I are very strategic about how we pick off our access. We take access, like all journalists do, I think, very seriously. So we're able to kind of triangulate and mute some of the reputational, shall we say, blowback that pertains to us because of the work that we do. Because he certainly wasn't eager to sit down with us. But my formative years was spent growing up under apartheid, and I guess my coming to political consciousness was undertaken while FW de Klerk was running the country. In a perfect world, FW de Klerk should be in prison for life, right? In a slightly less perfect world, he should have met the firing squad for what he did and what he knew. And what he helped perpetrate over his years. He is not a benign figure. He knew everything, right, about what was happening during apartheid, especially when the state was going to war with the various liberation movements that were fighting at the time. He did some really, really bad stuff and okayed some really, really bad stuff. Sitting down with him was really, really creepy. It was a wild moment. As someone whose career is based on the here and now of South African politics, and those dudes are bad enough, sitting down with this guy was kind of a milestone moment in my career. We nailed him. We did not accept any nonsense from him. We certainly left on the cutting room floor all of the usual babble that he goes on about, ending apartheid, so on and so forth. But what he did say afterwards is, you really made me sweat, which I think gave me and Diana a bit of a chuckle.
Yeah, the thing about him is, you know, you realize what a statesman he really is. He is
Oh, he's brilliant.
Trained to the last, and an incredibly imposing figure, even at his age, the age that he is now. You know, it was just a little funny story about it. We were filming on location, and we could not. We had decided to go with a certain style, and we wanted to get these quite elaborate couches in each space. We just could not, for love or money, rent a couch in Cape Town that we liked. So we had to go with what was available, which was one of these kind of outdoor, kind of lawn couches, probably about, I want to say, a good 30 centimeters lower than your average chair. And, you know, FW de Klerk is getting on in age, and we had to kind of lower him down into the seat. And it was actually, I was quite terrified for a while that we wouldn't be able to get him back up again. So there was that stress as well. But I think certainly you could see him stiffen and get more and more sharp as the interview went along. I think he realized quite quickly that we knew exactly what we wanted to ask him. And it was just interesting to see his reactions to things. Certainly knows exactly how to handle an interview and what to say and what not to say. Even when caught in an outright lie, he still manages to swing it his way. And that's just, you know, it's all part of the same system, right? It's understanding how to shape and create the narrative that ends up being the main one. So yeah,
the fact that he was able to wiggle his way out of apartheid, maintain the reputation that he did, win a Nobel Peace Prize, and go on to a very successful career of moving around the world and helping out other governments, helping out other presidents, acting as a consultant to the stars, as it were, is fucking miraculous. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I don't know if the moral failing is his or if it's the rest of us, but it's I don't think we appreciate how genuinely astonishing that is.
Yeah, I wish we'd had more time. You know, the biggest problem with this film was being able to fit in all of the information. I mean, the Chile section that we had initially in our first version of the film was much longer and much more concrete. The same with South Africa. I mean, the work that FW de Klerk and that, I suppose you can call them a cabal of people, you know, former world leaders, the Global Leadership Foundation and organizations like it do fascinating work. And it's completely underreported, the role that they play in developing countries and in advising future and current leaders, setting up these networks, and basically furthering the work that Bell laid down in 1994 in South Africa.
Okay. One final thing before I hand over to the questions. I am going to cast forward to the future in my kind of a wrap-up piece. But we've talked a lot about the villains. There is one hero, or Shiro, as I like to call it, in FilmZeli. Equally, you know, we've had a lot of darkness. Let's have a little bit of light before I ask you some questions from the audience. You come across as Zeli Van Damme, the heroine in there. Again, same type of thing about dealing with her and how she came into the process, and then, you know, literally the shining light within your film.
Yeah, Pumzile Van Damme, who is a controversial figure here in South Africa, is a parliamentarian who I think she's the shadow minister of communications currently. And she belongs to the Democratic Alliance, which is still the official opposition, probably not for long, but is a party that is traditionally in the South African political matrix considered to be a party for whites, or at least whites and upper middle class blacks. So within that, she has to navigate that process, which in its own way is very, very fraught and very, very difficult. But as a parliamentarian, she's been enormously effective at holding power to account. She is a very, very wise and very, very smart within that context. But I think one of her great moments was understanding the threat that Bell Pottinger posed to South Africa, along with other members of the Democratic Alliance, who politically, Diana and I couldn't be further away from. But nonetheless, what they proved was the value of real opposition politics in a parliamentarian setting like South Africa's. So they were able to get their legal team together, mount a spirited prosecution of Bell Pottinger within the context of the Public Relations and Communications Association, which is the oversight regulatory body, insofar as there is one. They flew over to London and they went to war, and they won, and that's extraordinary, you know. And what's the controversial part about this film in South Africa has been, why would you include the DA in this story? And the answer is, put your politics aside and understand that you need opposition. You need a political marketplace in a democracy. Otherwise, you're dead in the water anyway. So, you know, working with her was fantastic. I've known her for many years, and you know, we've had a number of arguments, ideological and otherwise. But it was extraordinary working with her. She's an amazing woman.
At the end of the day, she's a consummate politician. She's very good at what she does. The fact that she belongs to the Democratic Alliance is her choice ultimately, and that was the platform that she used to mount the campaign against Val Pottinger successfully, and probably one of very, very few cases in the world of this actually being successful. Val Pottinger was a very, very powerful company. So, you know, props to her.
Excellent. Okay, let's get to the questions from our audience. The first one's from Claire, which links into a bit of that last question. The research behind this film is outstanding. Were there any key people you hoped you could have spoken to in the documentary, but were not able to?
So many.
So many. I mean, sure. Look, I mean, as it is, it's a little bit overstuffed, but we had a list of, I want to say, 80 people.
Yeah, we sent a lot of emails, phone calls, LinkedIn queries, tried to, you know, exhort, you know, contacts out of all sorts of people, and we spent a lot of time in London trying to get meetings. There were a few, I suppose, members of parliament that we were hoping to get, some senior figures in the Thatcher campaign who went on to play some interesting geopolitical roles, let's put it that way. And certainly, I think in Chile we were hoping to get more information about the kind of the outcome of Pinochet's rule there, and what, because he still has a presence. His family still has a little kind of NGO in Santiago that sells merchandise, little cups and shirts with his face on them, and they fund certain organizations, certain think tanks, and we were hoping that we'd be able to kind of include that in the story, but of course people are very reticent there about that work. So certainly I think there were a lot of people that we'd hoped to include, and I think we were lucky to get the access that we did.
No, we were, and I mean it's you know, at a certain point you have to count yourself journalistically blessed, and I think on this film, you know, on balance, we were extraordinarily fortunate. And as it is, it's a movie that's heavy on information, and I think one more talking head would have broken the mainframe.
Okay, next question from Bia. What documentary filmmakers have you been most influenced by?
That's a good question. I would say I think Alex Gibney has been very influential for us. He's a US based filmmaker.
Sure, hopefully.
So everybody knows Alex Gibney. Of course, he is one of the major names in the industry. But you know, I think he takes on very many of the same topics and areas of interest that we do, which is, you know, global corruption, dark money, you know, those types of topics, and certainly his work has been very influential for us.
Look, but I also think, I mean, we wanted this film to have a very serious sense of style. That was enormously important to us, and what felt like the most powerful influences on influence, what was the American paranoid political thrillers of the 70s. And there's some very subtle sort of homages to that filmmaking style in the slow zooms. We use no drone. We use a very staid, very 70s sense of style in this film. So in terms of the documentarians that influenced this particular project, there really weren't any. But we really bit heavily on sort of 70s filmmaking styles that gave you that sense of paranoia, and linked to what we feel was a very moral streak of questioning power back in the 70s.
I mean, yeah, you make that link of the 70s. You make that about the South African Watergate within the film as well. So all the presidents met would have been a part of that.
Exactly.
Big influence, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, another question from Miles. Was it your intention from early on, if at all, to present Bell's work as a precursor to the current era of misleading and fake news?
No, I don't think it was. I think we made the link because of the obvious, which was that Val Pottinger was running a disinformation campaign and overseeing a much bigger campaign that involved Twitter, that involved social media. But I think that it was very difficult not to make the link once we got into it. Certainly, if you look at the trajectory of the communication of the spectrum of communication that industry that Bell was involved in, it was the natural lead from there, I would say. And it would have been difficult not to recognize or to acknowledge the role, that the formative role that his career played in where we are today in terms of how we use communication in political and democratic processes.
But that said, we were very careful about not over extrapolating. Yeah. So, I mean, the film would have lost all of its credibility if we were like, there's Bell and then there's Trump, which is completely untrue, because there are so many forces that have contributed to a phenomenon, a political phenomenon like Trump. So we wanted to be very careful about making spurious and rather silly over estimated claims about Bell's influence.
I'm not Sherlock Holmes, but the clues were there with my magnifying glass from Cambridge Analytica through there. You had things of the nepotism was there from Thatcher to his own family, so Mark Thatcher to his own family now with the plutocracy that Trump has. You had Catch and Kill. That was in your story. I caught that one, which the Inquirer later put on. So all those breadcrumbs were there, which I was picking up from within the film as well. So that leads me, we're gonna to the future, and both the future of South Africa and the future of the US, where you are, and its impact into the world, and into my kind of final piece, if you like. And with that birth of that, which actually I can't believe started it, that negative campaign, that I mean, you mentioned, we've got the blue wall, red walls, and that basis of fear. I mean, now it's in the system. How do you think we can get it out of the system, even when truth tellers is now, and so, and again, it's in there, and someone said, well, there's a little bit of doubt, and you're like, okay, yeah, well, and meanwhile they're over there doing their bits of destruction, where even if it was your next door neighbor, let's take South Africa off, but maybe it was Mugabe, and Mugabe was doing this, there would be thrown out of every corporation, every leading world organization if Mugabe tried to pull a stunt like the Republicans are doing, because it's not just Trump, by the way. But where does that kind of leave us within the future of democracy?
Well, look, that's the $64,000 question, and I think there's several ways to answer. First of all, the tools that were used in 2016 to help, and this is important, to help enable the chaos that would provide the conditions for a Republican win. Okay, and I use those stepping stone terms very carefully, because we are certain, as people who have looked at this as closely as we have, that the misinformation swirling in 2016, as bad as it was but one of dozens of contributing factors in the rise of the American far right, which, as you said during our pre-chat, Roger, has been around for centuries anyways. So this reawakening has caused because of a serious breakdown in the social contract, right? I mean, that to us seems fairly obvious. What drives this breakdown in the social contract? It's inequality. It's the extreme inequality that has only gained in pace, quite frankly, after so many of the measures that were put in place during the Thatcher and Reagan regimes that have contributed to effectively our, let's call it our neoliberal world order. Misinformation takes root very, very easily in the social conditions that exists in so much of the West today, right? There's all of these different fault lines. The fault lines go on class, they go on racial identity, they go on ethnic identity, they go on political identity. It makes the work of people like Tim Bell very, very easy, right? Now, 2016 was the peak of the kind of work that the Russians were doing, that Bell Pottinger were doing, Cambridge Analytica were doing. Something very chilling was told to us when we were researching this film by effectively one of the major people in Bell Pottinger. He said, what's happening is the insourcing of these techniques, the insourcing. So in other words, what Bell Pottinger and PR companies are doing increasingly is sort of benign work, right? There's still a lot of bad actors out there, but political parties and men like Donald Trump have now insourced their disinformation. Where was the major source of COVID-19 disinformation in the United States? Where was it? On Donald Trump's Twitter account, right? So the lies now come from within. The lies now come from the top. The messaging is all there is. And that's enormously dangerous.
But that also extends beyond politics to business and to the private sector as well. If you think about the massive media departments that most multinationals have, from banks to accounting firms to any number of different industries, there's an understanding that it's cheaper and more convenient to be able to hone and craft the messaging from within, and certainly that is something that is a risk that we see growing around the world. That being said, not to end this on a wholly negative note, because we don't want people to go and drink themselves to death. I think what we have seen in the last few months, the last year or two, even though it's been forced to the extreme, I think that there's been a kind of at least some form of acknowledgement from our primary modes of communication these days, which are social media platforms, that a lot of this disinformation and the way that this information is being disseminated is unsustainable and very, very dangerous. And I think this was the first time you've seen in an election that a sitting president was being sanctioned on a platform like Twitter. And certainly bodes well for moving in the right direction. Certainly, I think a lot more needs to be done, but we are aware of the fact that there are now think tanks and funded organizations and individuals out there who are actively looking for disinformation accounts and getting them shut down. We're talking about hundreds a day, thousands a day that need to be shut down. But the point is, there are people out there that are aware of it and they are working on it, as opposed to 2016, when it was just a free-for-all. Nobody really knew what was going on. A lot of people were in denial about what was happening. As is so often the case, these things tend to take a long time to really register. And so I think we take some heart from that there are people out there who are actively working to try to corral this and get it under control.
And just before we close, I know that we're trying to do that, but where does that leave the future in terms of what you do? We've got Bristol Cable here in terms of investigative journalism, really drilling into the truth. I'm really trying to find out. I mean, where's the beacons of the industry has been absolutely trashed and devastated. It's less money in terms of doing that. You literally have to be paragons of saints and virtue to try and dig through the cesspit of disinformation that's there. What's our final closing words and remarks? What do you believe that is the kind of key steps forward for our viewers and both journalists and as watchers and campaigners and true believers in democracy, whatever your political stripe?
Support investigative journalism.
Sure. Look, we're like proctologists who work without PPE. It's not particularly pleasant work, but there has to be proctologists. I mean, this is, so that's what we do. Look, the future is not about truth, because truth is a subjective categorization. The future is about fact, right? And I think as consumers of information, first of all, we need to practice information hygiene. We need to be sure of the stuff that we're putting in our mind, just as we're sure of the stuff that we're putting in our body. That's number one. Number two, support fact-based journalism, right? It's instructive that one of the things that Donald Trump is musing about going out of the Oval Office is to set up effectively a traditional broadcast company that would compete with Fox News. In other words, Fox News fake news isn't fake enough. We need something even faker, right? So again, we need to center back round to what makes a social contract. And that is, there's certain things we have to agree upon. But you and me are not going to agree on everything, Roger, but we do have to agree on fact. And that's where investigative journalism, and that's where the media should play a responsible role, rather than a negative role.
Absolutely.
I look forward to that day, Richard and Diana, when we can continue that conversation and really get into the nub of truth and facts and on all things in between. The film Influence is available until the 22nd of November on the Amplify platform. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We had 40 minutes. I could go on and on. So fascinating it was the rise of the privatization of politics and corruption on a truly industrial scale, and sadly the destruction of not only the news across the world, but also the democracy of the great country that we all find so much inspiration from, your homeland of South Africa. And we wish all your people well there in such dark times. We all wish that as a beacon of hope, of democracy, that our Black cousins across the Black diaspora can get true justice and tackle that inequality that you've touched upon, Richard and Diana.
Absolutely, Roger.
Thanks
for your time.
It was a pleasure, man.
Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank all of our team, our interpreter there as well, the Amplify team, and thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you at home, wherever you are. Stay safe, and one day we will be in a cinema near you, drinking over a glass of wine and arguing into the night. Cape wine as well. Drinks on you, Richard.
100%.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.